Okay, so picture this, right? You're on vacation with the family, enjoying a nice dinner. Kids are tucked away in bed, just a short walk away. You check on them regularly. Everything seems fine. And then one of them is just gone.
Ugh, it just sends chills down your spine, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's like that primal fear, right? And sadly, this isn't some movie plot. This was the reality for the McCanns back in 2007.
Right, and that terrifying scenario, I mean, it's every parent's worst nightmare. And it's a big part of why this case, even after all these years, still has this hold on people, you know?
It really does. So for our listeners who maybe don't know all the details, let's rewind a bit. May 3rd, 2007, the McCanns, a British family, are on Holiday Inn, Praia da Luz, Portugal.
Beautiful spot.
Right, like picture-perfect resort town, sunshine, beaches, the works. But this idyllic vacation, it quickly becomes an international mystery.
And it's one of those cases, too, where it's not just about what happened that night, but the ripples, the investigation, the media frenzy, all of it, you know, it just adds these layers to it.
So let's get into it. The McCanns are at the resort restaurant. I mean, how normal, right? Countless families on vacation, having dinner. Their 3 kids, including 3-year-old Madeleine, are asleep in their apartment.
And, you know, people hear that, right? They jump to conclusions. How could they leave their kids alone? But
Yeah.
you got to remember the context, right? This was a family resort. The restaurant was incredibly close, and they were checking on the kids regularly. This wasn't some, like, reckless abandonment or anything.
No, absolutely. But still, I can't even imagine that moment when Kate McCann goes to check on them around 10 p.m. and finds Madeleine's bed empty, window open. Just what goes through your mind at that point?
I mean, panic, right, chaos. Unfortunately, that's also where things can go wrong in these missing person cases, those first crucial hours.
Every second counts.
Absolutely. And how the case is handled right off the bat, it can make or break it. And in this instance, it seems the initial thought from the Portuguese police was that, you know, maybe Madeleine had wandered off.
Given her age, and I mean, it was a resort, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility.
Right, exactly. But, and this is a big but, even with that as a working theory, you'd still, ideally, treat it as a potential abduction until proven otherwise, right? Especially at a tourist destination.
Of course, yeah.
But it does seem like that initial assumption about her maybe wandering off, it might have influenced how quickly they secured the scene, how thoroughly they collected evidence in those early hours.
And that's where those missteps come into play.
Exactly. Because those first few hours, before potential evidence is compromised, lost, it's vital, you know, if there's any chance of finding a trail.
So when did things shift from, okay, a child is lost to, wait, this could be an abduction?
It seems like the gravity of it, that this wasn't a simple wandering off situation. It kind of set in as the night went on, you know? Searches intensified, no trace of Madeleine, and suddenly that possibility of something more sinister, it just couldn't be ignored.
And for the McCanns, I mean, as if the situation wasn't terrifying enough already, now it's like that fear just multiplies.
Oh, absolutely. And it's also where the case starts to take on a life of its own, going way beyond a local investigation. I mean, this became a global story, and fast.
Right, because this was 2007, pre-smartphone, pre-social media really taking off, and yet you saw Madeleine's face everywhere.
Everywhere. And it makes sense in a way, right? It was the story that resonated across borders, across languages. You have this little girl vanish from what should be a safe, familiar setting. It played into those fears every parent has. It was like this what-if scenario on a global scale.
And that level of attention, it's not just about awareness, it puts huge pressure on the investigation. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Tons of pressure on investigators, shaping public perception, the narrative. Like we were saying, narratives are fragile, they're easily influenced. And this case, with that much attention, it's a prime example.
So while everyone's trying to find answers, what were some of the early theories floating around? This mix of, I don't know, actual information, speculation, probably some wild guesses too, I'd imagine.
Oh, there was no shortage of speculation, that's for sure. And some of it, fueled by those early missteps in the investigation, it actually pointed the finger at the McCanns themselves.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Blaming the parents. That seems like, I don't know, a very slippery slope, especially so early on.
It's more common than you'd think, sadly. High-profile cases like this, the lines get blurred, seeking justice versus churning out sensational headlines.
It's just heartbreaking, honestly. They've lost their daughter, and now they're being scrutinized, every move analyzed under a microscope.
It's a horrific situation, and the sad thing is, once those accusations are out there, even if they're completely baseless, it's hard to escape that shadow.
So besides the blaming the parents angle, what other explanations were people coming up with?
Well, you had I guess you'd call them more realistic theories, or at least plausible with the little info available, like planned abduction, trafficking rings, that kind of thing. Someone watching the family, waiting for the right moment.
Yelling.
Yeah, really. And then, of course, you have the more out there theories. Sightings of Madeleine with different groups across Europe, or she wandered off, had an accident, just a tragic accident.
It's like without concrete answers, people felt this need to fill in the blanks themselves, even if it was just pure conjecture.
Exactly. And that's the thing with cases like this. Limited info from official sources, the age of instant news, social media, that void gets filled a lot of times with stuff that just muddies the water.
Right. So we have this perfect storm, missing child, potential missteps early on, media's going crazy, information, misinformation, all of it. So where do we even go from there?
And that's where it gets really interesting, because the Madeleine McCann case, it's not just about what happened that night in Portugal. It's about how we, as a global community, how we process information, especially stuff that triggers our deepest fears,
It becomes almost like a case study in how we handle information overload.
Yeah.
Especially when it's wrapped up in this really emotional package.
Yeah, and that's where you really got to be careful, It's easy to get caught up in it all, the emotion, the desire for answers, every new theory, every little detail. The internet doesn't help either.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, even back then, 2007, forums were blowing up with theories, and now, forget it. Social media has turned everyone into an armchair detective.
Exactly. Everyone's got a theory, an opinion, and it's like they lose sight that this isn't just some puzzle to solve, There's a real family, real lives impacted by all of this.
Which brings us to a pretty major development. Even if it wasn't necessarily a solution, I'm going to fast forward a bit here, to 2020, when German authorities named Christian Bruckner as a suspect in the case.
Right, and he was already, he wasn't just some random guy. Bruckner was a convicted criminal, which is important to remember.
Because that often gets lost, right? Just because someone's named as a suspect doesn't automatically equal guilt.
Exactly. Huge difference. Means they believe there's enough to connect him, but it's not a conviction, not even close. Still got to go through the whole process, build a case, evidence, all of it.
So even with this seemingly huge break in the case, it's still not over, not by a long shot.
Not at all. These investigations are incredibly complex, take time, you can't rush it. And while he's a person of interest, a key one for sure, authorities are still doing the work, putting those pieces together, trying to build something solid for court.
And I can't even begin to imagine what that's like for the McCanns to have this glimmer of hope, but still no real closure after all this time.
Their strength is incredible, honestly. To deal with the loss of their daughter, the constant media, the accusations, just the endless speculation, and still they keep going.
They never gave up, that's for sure. Still searching for answers, keeping Madeleine's story out there, all while trying to protect their other children, maintain some kind of normalcy.
Really speaks to the power of hope even in the darkest times. And it shows how, the media might move on, but for those directly involved, it never truly ends, that search for the truth.
So where do things stand now with the investigation? Anything new? Any leads panning out?
Can't really get into specifics, obviously, with it being ongoing and all, but what I can say is authorities seem committed to figuring out what happened to Madeleine. They're re-examining old evidence, new tech helps with that, following up on anything that comes their way, really exploring all avenues.
Which I imagine gives at least some comfort to people who follow this case, that there are people still actively working on it.
It's a long road, often a frustrating one, but justice, it rarely takes a break, And while the investigation continues, I think it makes us all think about how we approach these kinds of cases, you and me, everyone, how we consume information about them.
Because it's so easy to get sucked into the headlines, the speculation, that desire for a neat ending, a quick answer.
It really is. But we got to remember, this isn't just entertainment. There are real lives at the heart of it. And the Madeleine McCann case, with all its twists and turns, the unanswered questions, it highlights just how important it is to be careful with information.
Can't just believe everything you read online.
Right.
Got to think critically, consider the source, all that.
Absolutely. It's a tragic story, truly, but it offers this crash course in media literacy, in critical thinking, and how crucial those things are.
It's like a reminder that real life is not some perfectly plotted episode. You know? It's messy, there are loose ends, and sometimes those answers, they just they never come.
And that's tough for us to deal with, right? As humans, I mean. Especially these days, we're bombarded with information. We want those neat endings, that sense of closure. But the Madeleine McCann case, it kind of throws that back at us, you know? Sometimes the most important thing is acknowledging what we don't know.
Yeah, fighting that urge to jump to conclusions, to grab onto the simplest explanation, even if the truth is way more complicated.
Absolutely. And this case, as awful as it is, it does give us this lens to look at bigger things, you know? Media ethics, how we consume information now, that human need to make sense of chaos, even when it's impossible.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one big takeaway you hope our listeners really hold on to?
For me, it always comes back to the human side of things. Headlines, theories, all that fades away. But at the core, there's a family dealing with a loss most of us can't even fathom. And while we might never know exactly what happened to Madeleine, I think we can hold on to that, the empathy, acknowledging their pain.
Behind every case, every mystery, there are real people whose lives are forever changed by it.
Exactly. No matter how familiar you are with this story, I think that's something important for all of us to remember.
This deep dive, it's been, heartbreaking, but also really important to revisit. Thank you so much for walking us through it all.
Glad to do it.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us, as always. If this conversation has got you thinking, do some digging yourself, check out reputable sources, talk about it, and never be afraid to ask questions.